Hey everyone, today I want to talk about a very common thing that happens when travelers go abroad. Go abroad. That means they go to a different country or a different area that's very different from their own. And when you go to a new place, especially a different country, you probably often feel culture shock. As you can see in this cartoon, there's kind of like three phases this girl is experiencing, right? So today I want to talk a little bit about the features of culture shock and what happens during this process. I want to start by sharing a personal story of a time when I traveled abroad. In my mid to late 20s, I had the opportunity to go to this country here. Do you happen to know where it might be? Japan. That's correct. I went to Japan to teach English, and I traveled across the Pacific Ocean to a totally new country where the people speak a very different language, use a totally different form of currency than what I was used to. So it was a pretty big shock. And I went from being in Tokyo for some training to then going to my home, my area where I was going to live and work for a year, called Yurihamacho. It's in the Tottori Ken, Tottori Prefecture, and it was very rural. So this is the map of Japan, and I was right there where that yellow star is. So it was very rural, and I was pretty much the only foreigner in that little town there. I was the only one, and so it was a very unique experience. And this is a picture of me on my first day of school. I was teaching, I was an assistant language teacher, mainly at a junior high school, but I also taught at the elementary and the kindergartens. So, yeah, many years ago. I had a bit of culture shock, y'all. I came from the United States. I came from Chicago, is where I grew up. And so I wanted to share a few of the things that were shocking to me when I moved to Japan. The first one was in my house, I had an electric toilet. It may seem strange, but it's plugged in and it gets warm. So in the cold, cold winter time, when you use the bathroom, it's not so cold when you sit down. It was just a surprise to me. Another thing was that in my bedroom, it was a traditional tatami room, I didn't have a bed. I wondered, where's my bed? But maybe you can see deep in the room there are things folded up. Those things that are folded up are called futon. Futon. It's a mattress without springs, and you can roll it up and put it away for the day. As you can see, there is my futon bed. I have three futons on top of each other. I'm not sure you're supposed to use that many, but I was not used to sleeping on futon coming from my bed in America. So that was a bit of a shock to me. Also, a different thing was eating with chopsticks. I learned quickly because I was hungry, but it's a skill to use chopsticks properly and correctly, and there's manners and there's etiquette you need to learn when you're using them. So that was a new thing for me. As well as the toilets in many of the public spaces and even at our school. These were the toilets that we had to use. And so that was a different thing for me. I was not used to those. And also in Japan, they drive on the left side of the street, which was different from the way I grew up. And also, when you drive the car in Japan, the driver is on the right side of the car. And so, another thing I had to get used to. In my house, there were appliances. I had a microwave, but unfortunately, without the help of someone translating, I didn't know what any of those buttons were. It was really hard to know how to use my appliances in my house. And also, everyone looked very different from me. I was tall, I had long hair. They liked to touch my hair. It was very different. And we had a language barrier, and I had blue eyes, and I had kind of brownish hair then. And so I was tall, and I was just different. So it was a bit of a shock, a surprise. And so I wanted to share a definition with you about culture shock. Culture shock is the predictable cycle of ups and downs that newcomers go through as they adjust to a new cultural environment. Notice the words cycle, cycle. It's going to come back around again and has ups and downs as the newcomer adjusts to a new cultural environment. And you guys, culture shock's a process. Sometimes you see diagrams like this, where you're up and you're down and it's good and it's bad and you're happy and you're sad. And so the more time you spend in the country, the farther along you go in the process. And culture shock has different phases or stages. There's different phases or stages of culture shock. Today I want to present the four kind of basic parts or stages of culture shock: the honeymoon phase, the frustration phase, the adjustment phase, and the acceptance phase. So let's explain what happens in the honeymoon phase. In this first stage of culture shock, it's usually a positive time during which travelers fall in love with the language, the people, the food in their new country. At this stage, the choice to travel or move seems like the greatest decision ever made. On short trips, the honeymoon phase may take the entire experience, and the latter effects of culture shock don't set in. But on longer trips, the honeymoon stage will usually last about a few weeks or a few months. The next phase people often go through, a newcomer will face, is called the frustration phase. Some people call it the crisis stage. And this is probably the most difficult part of culture shock and probably familiar to anyone who has lived abroad or travels frequently. At this stage, the fatigue of not understanding gestures, signs, the language sets in, and miscommunication may be happening frequently. Small things like losing your keys or missing the bus or not being able to order food in a restaurant may trigger frustration. And while irritation comes and goes, it's a natural reaction for people spending time, extended time, in new countries. Short periods of depression or homesickness and feelings of longing to go home where things are familiar and comfortable are all common during the frustration phase. The next phase is called the adjustment phase. The adjustment phase is also called recovery phase, and this is the third stage of culture shock. And in this time of your experience, your frustrations are often reduced, and you begin to feel more comfortable and more familiar with the culture, people, food, and languages of the new environment. Navigation becomes easier. Friends and communities of support are established, and details of local languages may become more recognizable during the adjustment stage, meaning you become more confident in the language and moving through society there. The final phase is called the acceptance phase. The acceptance phase. And this doesn't mean that the new culture or the new environment are completely understood, but it signifies the realization that complete understanding isn't necessary to function and thrive in new surroundings. During the acceptance stage, travelers have the familiarity and are able to draw together the resources they need to feel safe and enjoy a balanced life. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about the phases of culture shock, how they go through and up and down like a roller coaster sometimes, and to know that where you are in this culture shock will give you an idea of how you can expect to go through and what's coming for you. So if you have a little bit of confusion, rewind the video and play it again, and we'll talk to you again soon.